Good day. We welcome you in the Media Center Ukraine and Ukrinform. So now we will conduct the common briefing of the agencies of the security and defense sector as for the operational situation at the front line of russo-Ukrainian war. We have Hanna, Maliar, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine here, please. Hello. Glory to Ukraine. During the 160 days of war, we thought that we've seen enough of the horrors of Russian world, but the Russians go on losing their human face in the worst traditions of the Red and Nazi regiments. The protectors and defenders of Ukraine are fighting at the front line and do not allow the situation for the crime and aggressor country to disseminate terror on other regions. The courage and forces of the Ukrainian people, the armed forces of Ukraine, and our unity are just ruining all the plans of the Kremlin. With the same spirit, we need to hold on further and further at all of the directions of defense and in the diplomatic relations. During the previous week, we had several significant meetings and negotiations committed to increase the support for Ukraine and our integration into the Euro-Atlantic security architecture. The Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, as well as the deputy on the anti-mine activity authority, Vyacheslav Shapovalov, met the corporations of Tetra Tech American company representatives, the official representative of the State Department of the US in Ukraine, which has the task to provide, from behalf of the United States, help and support for our country in the sphere of anti-mine activity. Unfortunately, the consequences of war will be eliminated for dozens of years, and the government of the United States is the biggest sponsor in the world in demining. So we need material technical support for the units which are involved in the conduction of works on demining on the liberated territories from the Kremlin occupiers. This kind of help will be provided within the comprehensive package of help on humanitarian demining, which is provided by the State Department of the United States of America. And also last week, during the meeting of the National Cluster of Cybersecurity with the topic of cybersecurity at the local level, regional challenges and protection of borders, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine on digital development, digital transformation and digitalization, Oleksii, has announced the conduction of the National Defense Hackathon with the initiative of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine in cooperation with the General Staff of the Armed Forces, the National Security and Defense Council, and with the support of American partners. During the last 8 years, Russia is conducting the full-scale cyber war against Ukraine, constantly increasing its offensive actions and using new types of cyber weapons, changing its tactics and mechanisms. We are also having some of the tools and means, and during the hackathon we'll have really precise and specific tasks and aims. This is an important step in the coordination of the efforts of cyber community within the tasks accomplishment of cyber protection of Ukraine. We will also develop the organizational legal principles of the activities of cyber security and defense, the creation and implementation of the leading solutions for cyber fight. Several days ago, I, as a deputy minister, had an opportunity to meet the representative of the armed forces of the United Kingdom, and we were speaking about the strategic communications. We also had the diplomats of the Embassy of the United Kingdom in this meeting, and they are also dealing with the issues of strategic communications as well. The thing is that Russia is conducting its informational impact and its informational expansion not only all over the territory of Ukraine, but all over the territory of other countries. Today, Russia funds lots of cultural and art events. In Europe, for instance, today Russia is funding, and the Russians are the owners of the media in Europe. And as of today, Russia is investing into the political projects in Europe, trying to impact and influence not only the informational field, but also to influence the societal opinion of the Europeans. as of the events in Ukraine, that is the war, and about anything, the attitude towards Russian Federation. So at this meeting with our British partners, we were discussing those risks. They understand those risks, so we are ready to have some common work in the fight against Russian informational expansion. During the week, the security situation as for Ukraine was still complicated but under control. Coming to the information of the General Intelligence Department, which they provide weekly for this briefing, the armed forces of Ukraine and the armed forces of Russian Federation during this week have continued the offensive to get to the administrative borders of Luhansk and Donetsk regions and oblasts, and also to retain the occupied regions of Kherson, part of Kharkiv, Zaporizhia and Mykolaiv regions. Looking at the dissemination of information, as for the readiness of our troops to conduct deoccupation of Kherson region, Russian commandment is conducting substantial regrouping and strengthening the troops in the southern parts of our state and temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. As of today, the main efforts of the adversary are concentrated on the warfare at the east. In more details about that, the representative of the General Staff will tell about that. Simultaneously, the Russian propaganda staff is strengthening negative informational psychological impact onto the population which is located on the temporarily occupied territories of east and south of Ukraine. There, unfortunately, people are forced to stay. Our citizens who, because of different reasons, could not leave those territories in spite of the organized evacuation by the Ukrainian authorities and in spite of regular warnings about some of the possible threats. The Russian propaganda is intensely failing the local TV and radio space on the territory of the settlements in the public places. They are increasing the posting of Russian propaganda and advertisement. At the temporarily occupied territories, they fully have, if we may name them, media. Well, as if media. In fact, those are just Russian propaganda speakers. They have the mobile points to disseminate books and newspapers in the classical traditions of Soviet propaganda. But in spite of those large-scale efforts, Russia is failing in the informational front line as well. The Ukrainian population at the temporarily occupied territories is showing categorical lack of perception of the Russian occupation and the imposing of the ideology of Russian world. As there are some of the dotty cases or separate cases of cooperation with the occupier, in the vast majority, the Ukrainian citizens who are now at the territory of the temporarily occupied territories are not cooperating with the adversary, and they are awaiting for the liberation of this territory by Ukraine. Under such condition, the enemy is still creating the desired propaganda picture, just faking as the staged materials. In particular, to shoot videos as if the local population supports Russian occupiers, they bring civilians from Russia and the temporarily occupied Crimea. Simultaneously, we've found out several cases of the participants of so-called activists in different staged events, as if they are massively supporting the so-called referendums, which are planned to be conducted by Russian Federation. Now we are coming to our traditional report on the provision by ammunition, with ammunition and payments for our servicemen. During the period since the 28th of July till the 3rd of August, that is the previous week, the Ministry of Defense, to provide the units of the armed forces of Ukraine, has given more than 27,000 of armored vests, more than 30,000 of helmets, and more than 10,000 of pairs of boots. The people who are following our briefings, you can see that we've already having following the rhythmical provision with more or less foreseen volumes. In the planned mode, as of the previous, in comparison with previous weeks, we deliver the uniform, including the winter uniform. We are constantly following and observing the provision in about 40 positions of attire and equipment, beginning with tents and sleeping bags to socks. For instance, if we're speaking about socks, we've delivered more than 2.8 million pairs of socks, of summer socks. We also awarded the contract for the delivery of 5,000 tents, and we have another commission with the local producer underway. I would also like to emphasize that thanks to those periodical deliveries, we provide the priority positions with the equipment and we form the reserves. In particular, as for the armored vests and the helmets, during the week the reserves have increased for 11 to 13 thousands of units. Taking into consideration that simultaneously we disseminate and replace the obsolete ones, and we also increase the armored part of the protection of Ukrainian manufacturing, which I mentioned last time. I'd like to remind you the procedure. The Ministry of Defense is giving ammunition to the warehouses of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense does not have its own warehouses. The products which are now located at the warehouses of the armed forces of Ukraine are in their disposal, and depending on the overall need, the armed forces are distributing the ammunition. So when we are publicly discussing some separate case where can be some problems because this is the war and organizationally it's very hard to conduct it, we did not take into account that the armed forces of Ukraine have the overall picture, and they create the delivery and supply process and distribution, taking into account not some separate cases which are being discussed without the overall picture, but out of the full picture along the front line and the needs all over the area of Ukraine. Okay, now about the money. The main piece of news is that there are no changes, because you know that there were lots of rumors, lots of misunderstanding of the situation, in spite of the objective complications of the economy, which were done because of the Russian invasions against our territory and the full-scale war. Still, the payments in July for June were done according to the plan. The financiers of the Ministry of Defense did their best, because we are simultaneously procuring weapons, the necessary equipment and attire. Those are huge payments which needed to be organized, not to have any discrepancies and problems in each of those provisions. As of today, because of some of the technical reasons, there were delays of less than 5% of money payments, but they will be guaranteed. During July, in comparison with June, we are expecting for the increase of the payments for approximately 15%. So altogether, they are expecting at the level of 70 billion hryvnia. And I would like to remind you, in comparison, that last year the budget was adopted by the Ministry of Defense for 2022. That's a bit more than 130 billion per year for everything. And now during the month we are paying just to provide salaries 64 billion. Next year this figure will be up to 70 billion. Next month, sorry. And now we are coming to our victories at the legal front line, because the legal department of the Ministry of Defense is going on with its campaign to get back the illegally taken from the Ministry of Defense property resources, in particular lands and other real estate. The legal department of the Ministry of Defense is conducting fight against, well, I mean in the legal surface, against some of the suppliers of services and goods for the armed forces who were not appropriate. For instance, out of our victories, during the previous briefings, we announced that The courts gave back the rights for more than 1,000 square meters of our real estate. As of today, the legal service of the Ministry of Defense has already had some of the measures to get back the property under the Ministry of Defense. After the court verdict, there should be some of the procedures for the factual use of the resources. As of the Western Appeal Economic Court, as for the sphere of the management of the Ministry of Defense, together with their executive service, according to the acts, we've taken back the real estate of the area of more than 1,000 square meters located at the land plot of the 3.96 hectare in Lviv region. As of the unscrupulous or dishonest suppliers, we have more numerous cases. For instance, there was a supplier who did not comply with his obligations to provide fuel materials for the special equipment and vehicles. On the 21st of July, the court of Kyiv City had two verdicts for Ministry of Defense, which the economic entity will have to pay fines for the unconsciousness obligations. Thank you. Now the floor is for Oleksii Hromov, Deputy Head of the Main Operations Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. As for the operational situation at the front line, please. So the goal of Moscow is still to get to the administrative borders of Donetsk region, to have the parts of Kharkiv, Kherson's, Mykolaiv regions, and also the functioning of the land corridor between Rostov region and the occupied Crimea. The combats of the adversary is still using the Syrian experience. The adversary is totally destroying the civil infrastructure and the civilians, first of all, by shelling with the missiles. The adversary is going on with the preparation to seize new territories at the east of Ukraine and for the long-term combats and warfare. We can see the increase of the forces at Zaporizhia and Kherson directions. The adversary has moved 3 battalions of tactical group, which were having missions at the Novopavlivka direction, and also included 1 battalion tactical group at Zaporizhia direction. Simultaneously, we need to mention that the increase and of the groups of troops at Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, especially at Melitopol directions, is done by the railways through Kerch Bridge and the temporary occupied Crimea. The territory of the Administrative Republic of Crimea is used as a platform to pile up some of the equipment, ammunition, and the material technical resources to fill the losses and gaps of the troops at the above-mentioned directions. We can also see the transferring of the aviation to the operational airdromes of the temporarily occupied Crimea. Besides that, the aggressor is still forming additional units and reserves to conduct combats on the territory of Ukraine, and also taking some of the ammunition from the storage to man their troops, which had some losses. Separately, I'd like to mention that the commandment of the Russian Federation to stop the outflow of the stuff from their armed forces, they are preparing the amendments to the legislation to stop them from suspension during the martial law or the so-called special military operation. We can see the very low level of activity of the people who desire to take part in the special military operation by contract. There is the substantial indicators which not achieve the desired effect, and within the manning of the Russian occupational forces which take part in the so-called special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, they consider the transfer of the Russian servicemen from Syria to Ukraine. During the week, the main forces of Kremlin were focused on the combats in the eastern operational zone, first of all Kramatorsk, Bakhmut and other directions. As for Volyn, Zhytomyr and Kyiv directions, the situation during the week was still under control. There were no substantial changes. The defense forces are going on stabilizing the stabilization operation. At the Belarus part, they transfer some of the parts and units of the forces. The military activity of the armed forces of Russian Federation in Belarus is unsubstantial, and the formation of the Russian Federation do not create any of the offensive groups. The probability of the offensive of the adversary from the territory of Belarus or the invasion of Belarusian troops is low, but the missile hits threat is still there. As for Chernihiv, Konotop and Sumy directions, the adversary is going on conducting shellings using different types of artillery against the positions of our troops. The majority of the shellings were done against Synkivka, Zalizny Mist of Chernihiv region, Mikhalchina Sloboda of Sumy region, but their intensity in comparison with the previous year decreased from 50 to 39 shellings. During the week, we also registered 1 missile shelling against the settlement of Bohodukhiv and 39 shellings of the positions of our troops, as it was mentioned above. As of now, to stop the actions of our troops and not to have additional forces at the border regions with Ukraine on the territory of Bryansk, Kursk and Belgorod regions of Russia, the adversary has created the troops forces to cover and contain to screen the border services. Mostly it is done with the conscripts and the staff servicemen who decided not to take part in the so-called special military operation on the territory of Ukraine. As for the settlement of Valuiki of Belgorod region of Russia, they have their warehouses of ammunition, and also they organized the so-called volunteer staff, where with the civilian vehicles to the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, they give some of the parcels for the servicemen, and vice versa, they bring stolen property. As for the Kharkiv direction, the adversary did not have any active combats. The most focus is done to contain and to retain the territories which were already occupied. They go on with missile hits against Kharkiv, Chuhuiv, Burinka, and aircraft missiles against shellings against Stary-Saltiv from the multiple launch rocket systems, including the objects of civil infrastructure. The biggest number of missile shellings was against Kharkiv city, 5 missile hits. Besides that, the adversary used the ammunition in Chuhuiv and Rusko-Lazova. The defense forces had the deterring and defensive actions, but still we managed to get into the defense of adversary and to establish ourselves on the liberated territories. As for the Slovyansk direction, there were some of the combats to stop our actions. There were aircraft missiles in Husarivka, Dibriva, and the missile hit against Mykolaiivka. During the week, our forces have improved their positions in the settlements of Mazanivka, Brashkivka, Sulugunivka, Dmitrivka. We've liberated 2 settlements, Mazanivka and Dmitrivka. As for Kramatorsk and Bakhmut directions, the adversary is conducting the shellings of our troops with the use of the artillery along the whole contact line. And also, they've conducted offensive actions to take away our units from the edges, and also was trying to take Soledar to block the Bakhmut from the southern, eastern and eastern directions. They were using aircraft, the whole range of the small arms and other arms in the region of Soledar, Pokrovske, Grigorivka, Yakovlevka, Bakhmutske, Bakhmut and Zaitsevo. Because of the massive use of the artillery by the adversary and active offensive storm actions the adversary managed to take away our troops. Our units had to leave Samoghiria and to get to defense of the eastern part of Cordova. As for Pokrovsky and Bakhmut, the adversary has also conducted the active offensive actions. As for now, the combat warfare is going on. As for Avdiivka direction, the adversary has activated the offensive actions to take away our troops from the edges and to take the settlements of Avdiivka and Pisky. They also used aircrafts and all the armament against the positions of our troops, focusing their efforts on Krasnohorivka, Avdiivka, Opytne, Vodyane, Pisky and Novobakhmutivka. On the 30th of July, as the result of the active use of air aviation and MLRSs, they had active offensive actions at the direction of Spartak Avdiivka. The defense forces had to leave the mine of Butivka and to get to Avdiivka, to the southern part of Avdiivka. As for Novopavlivka direction, the adversary is going on to provide the fire damage along the front line of the established positions of our troops. They provide fire along the impact area of Volodar, Novovolodymyrivka, Velika Novosilivka and Pavlivka. As for Zaporizhia direction, the adversary was shelling against our positions using the small arms and also artillery, using also aircraft against Malysherbaki, Novoopel, Vrimivka, Novoandriivka, Stepove. In the southern Bug operational regions, the adversary is trying to establish the positions without letting our troops to get into their defense, not to lead to the loss of their territories and to deter counter-offensive of our troops. They add additional defensive forces from other directions, from the 76th Airborne Brigade of the adversary. They also go on with missile and aircraft hits against the civilian infrastructure objects in Mykolaiv and Odessa regions. The vast majority of the hits is done against Mykolaiv and other adjacent territories. We can see also the strengthening of the positions of the occupied territories. As for the southern eastern parts of Kherson region, they brought lots of ammunition and equipment. We do not accept that the adversary will try to provide offensive into our territory, to take initiative and to create threat for our success, to make the armed forces of Ukraine stop the expansion of our platforms. We need to mention that among the staff of the groups of the Russian occupational forces in Kherson city, there is information about the location at the left bank of the Dnieper River, some of the troops of the National Guard from Chechen Republic, which, as if get a decree not to allow the surrender. In the northern eastern part of the Black Sea, the ship formations are blocking the civil shipping in the southern and northern eastern part of the Black Sea, and the civil infrastructure objects within our territory. In the aquatorium of the Black Sea, they try to use the high precision armament. They have the 4 carriers of cruise missiles, up to 28 missiles altogether. Within the signing of the initiative, as for the secure delivery of grains and cereals and the other food products, there have been the coordinational center which began its work in Istanbul with the participants from the armed forces of Ukraine. As of now, we've defined the maritime humanitarian corridor to the Bosphorus. From the 1st to the 2nd of August, this corridor had the first ship from Odessa port with the corn of 26.5 thousand tons to the Mediterranean Sea. So this corridor did not have any obstacles. Further, there's ship journeys should be regular, and our representatives are working in the coordinational center for that. Since the 28th of July till the 4th of August, the adversary has conducted 21 launch of cruise missiles and 9 ballistic missiles of Iskander. They hit the objects of military and civil infrastructure. Our troops during the week the missile and artillery units, thanks to the HIMARS and MLRSs, they have hit 10 command points of different types of management, including 3 divisions, approximately 15 warehouses and logistical bases of fuel stations, 3 radar stations, and also the modern electronic surveillance station Pidlert. And also had 38 aircraft hits against the military staff of the adversary, 11 hits, 11 against the commandment of tactical level, and 7 warehouses of ammunition. It is hard, but still believe into the armed forces. Thank you. Thank you. Now we give the floor to Oleksii Nadtochyi, head of the Operation Office of the main Directorate of the National Guard of Ukraine. Hello, dear presentees. So traditionally, about the role and the place of National Guard of Ukraine in the rebuke of the military aggression as of the 4th of August. The military units of the National Guard within the defined groups of the troops of armed forces of Ukraine go on to take part in the defense operations in Slobozhansky, Donetsk, Pivdenno Bug operational regions, stabilization actions and territorial defense in Lviv, Carpathian, Bukovina and Podillia operational regions. The containment of the offensive of the overwhelming forces of the adversary around Kharkiv, Slovyansk and Siversk, defense of the cities of Kryvyi Rih, Mykolaiv and Zaporizhia. As for the northern western operational zone, Volyn, Polisia and Siversky operational regions, in the cooperation with the State Border Service and the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the National Guard is going on with the screening of the state border from the Republic of Belarus. During the stabilization operations and tasks of the territorial defense, the main forces are focused on the defense and protection of the important state objects, the protection of the state authorities and the objects of critical infrastructure, and also deterring of anti-saboteur and anti-airborne resources. Besides that, to support the land operations actions, the aviation of the National Guard for the fire damage of the adversary, we've conducted 18 helicopter sorties, the aeromedical evacuation and transportation, found out 289 targets of the adversary. Out of them, the observation posts found out 46, and also UAV squads 243. The diving teams go on with the observation of the different inspection of reservoirs. They were also inspected 93.5 square kilometers, out of which 13 square kilometers of the riverbed of the Irpin River, 80.5 square kilometers of the riverbed of the Dnieper River. We found out helicopters 2 units, armored fighting vehicles 2 units, infantry fighting vehicles 3 units, airborne infantry fighting vehicles 6, excavator 1, and anti-tank mines TM62 21 units. We've used the services of 17 servicemen, including 5 divers, and the National Guard, both in the cooperation with the National Police and the Military Law Enforcement Service with the Territorial Defense, where they go on to accomplish missions 24/7 at the checkpoints. As of today, those tasks are done at 182 checkpoints in 13 regions of Ukraine, among which 35 are in Kyiv city. The results of the special tasks to support the legal mode of martial law. During this week, we've suspended 1,426, detained 1,426 persons. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we've detained more than 23,000 persons, out of whom 385 with a suspicion in the participants in the saboteur groups. We've seized 46 units of firearms, 14,000 of ammunition units, 96 grenades, 4 mine throwers, 22 kilos of explosive devices, 6 anti-tank mines, and 22 artillery shells. The examples of the special missions during the recent times. The air intelligence unit of the National Guard of Ukraine, in cooperation with the artillerists of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in Kharkiv region, they have found out and totally ruined the Russian self-propelled missile complex Tunguska. The mechanized and tank units, which was done for those missions. The mine throwers units are going on ruining the adversary at the Zaporizhia directions, and during those military actions they've totally ruined the established positions of the staff and 2 units of the military equipment. Our servicemen are standing for the independence of Ukraine, protecting the citizens and fighting for the free future of our state. Every day is the new page of the history, the new accomplishments and real heroes and victories. For the special military heroism and the courage during the protection of the territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine, the decree of the President of Ukraine has awarded 3 military units of the National Guard with the award for the courage. This is the 4th Brigade of the operational significance, named after the hero of Ukraine, Sergeant Sergei Mikhalchuk, the 8th Regiment of the operational service of the National Guard, named after Ivan Bogun, and the 3rd Brigade named after the Colonel Petrobol Bochan. Since the beginning of the 2014, those military units have invested a lot to protect our statehood. Liberation of Kharkiv regional state administration, fights for Slovyansk, Debaltseve, Popasna, Svitlodarsk, and also other settlements in the territory of the anti-terroristic operation, Joint Forces Operation. And since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, those were combats for the Hostomel airdrome, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Izium, Rubizhne, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. The active combats need substantial work to the treatment and the rehabilitation of our servicemen, including the psychological ones. It is done both in the healthcare institutions in Ukraine and abroad. As of now, 46 National Guard servicemen are being treated abroad. They had the mine-exploded traumas, the firearm injuries and wounds, and 6 of them had prosthetics. We need to mention that during the 5 months, more than 1,000 National Guard servicemen had rehabilitation and decompression, among whom those are the protections of Ukraine who came back from the capture. We take care about the protectors of the state. Thank you for attention. Now we give the floor to the Oleksii Sergeyev, the head of the operational provision of the National Police of Ukraine. Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. This is the 6th month in a row when the police officers are going on with work in this mode, very often with a threat against their lives and health. They provide the order and security. They are actively involved to rebuke the military aggression. The main work of the National Police during these times is still the documentation and the investigation of military crimes, the organization of the work at the checkpoints all over the country, the active actions to counter the saboteur groups and collaborants, the demining of the territories, the countering of the illegal turnover of the weapons and other crimes. The enemy is going on with the tactics of chaotic shellings of the whole territory of Ukraine. For instance, just yesterday, the police has registered the shellings of 34 settlements. As the consequences, 6 civilians died and 37 were injured. Just in Mykolaiv region during yesterday, among the especially important military objects, so-called military objects, there were 10 private and 2 multi-storied buildings, 2 stores, a food store, the horse riding school, 2 pharmacies and the bank affiliate. And because of the shelling of Vinnytsia city on the 14th of July, 1 more citizen of Ukraine died in the hospital, the doctor. So the number of victims of this attack against the civilians in Ukraine has increased to 28 people, among which there are 3 children and more than 200 of people were injured. Several hours ago, because of the artillery shelling, Could you show the previous slide? There will be pictures. Several hours ago, because of the artillery shelling of Toretsk city at Donetsk region, 8 people died, 7 civilians and 1 police officer. A woman who is working in the criminal police of the Bakhmut police department. 4 people were injured, out of whom 3 children. A multi-storied building has been damaged, a church and the public transport stop. It again confirms the fact that Russia is targetedly committing terroristic acts against the population of Ukraine and of course is aggressor state. The National Police is providing the detailed registering of all of the military crimes of the Russian Federation. The materials of the open criminal proceedings will become the foundation to accuse the aggressor in the international courts. As of today, the investigators of the National Police have already started more than 26,000 criminal proceedings because of the military crimes by the servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and other other crimes connected with the martial law. Most of all, this is the Article 438 of the Criminal Code, the violation of laws of war, 18,000. The Article 110, this is the fight against the territorial integrity of Ukraine, more than 6.5 thousand. And 111, Article 111.1. So also we are countering the illegal turnover of weapons. Since the beginning of the war, we found out more than 3,000 cases of illegal use of weapons. Approximately 14 of those crimes are registered per day. We've seized more than 410 shotguns, 145 machine guns, 83,000 of ammunition units, and more than 1,000 of grenades, which were seized from the illegal turnover. On the 11th of July, from the vehicle of the citizen who was going to the capital, we took lots of ammunition from the vehicle. And also in Kyiv we found out 2 locals who during the search we found the grenade RGD-5, the Kalashnikov machine gun, and also more than 3,000 ammunition units. We're going on working at the checkpoints. In average, we daily provide the functioning of 714 checkpoints where 24/7 there are more than 2,000 of police officers. With the help of the informational subsystem Blockpost, we found out of 460 missing people and 3.5 thousand people who could be working in the saboteur on collaboration activities or were suspected in these activities. We found so many vehicles which were missing as well. Thanks to the coordination efforts of the police officers in the cooperation with the National Guard and Territorial Defense during the service at the checkpoints, we've seized 50,000 of ammunition units, 400 of grenades and an explosive device. We registered more than 5,000 of administrative crimes. On the 29th of July in Volyn region, during the search of the vehicle of Kamenka-Shirsky city, we've seized 182 ammunition units of different caliber, a shotgun and the knife. And we also stopped the vehicle with the Sumy resident in it. And while the search, we found out and seized 2,000 of ammunition units of different caliber and 3 grenades. On the 1st of August, at the checkpoint of Poltava region, we stopped a Renault vehicle with the resident of Gadych city, and we found the Kalashnikov machine gun for 120 ammunition units. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia is using saboteur groups and some of the people who are collaborators. Since the 24th of February on the territory of the state, we've detained more than 1,607 people who take part in the saboteur activities, and 1,100 are given to the security service of Ukraine. We also opened 1,106 criminal proceedings because of collaboration. On the 26th of July, the local residents were revealed who were just providing information for the Russian troops. We also discovered the fire adjusting network. The locals, the woman and two men, were administering the Telegram chat and were taking money, giving the coordinates of the dislocation of the armed forces of Ukraine and the places where the shells hit. At the same place in Donetsk region, the beginning of August, the people from Drushkivka were detained because they were providing situation about the armed forces of Ukraine. A 35-year-old man was sending to his acquaintance, the resident of Russia, the detailed information about Drushkivka and Kramatorsk. The police officers of Lugansk, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv are going on the evacuation measures, evacuating the residents from the territory of the combats. They are accompanying the people to the safe regions. During the last 2 weeks, with the participants of the police officers, we evacuated more than 15,000 people. The day before yesterday, the police crew, the White Angel, has evacuated 75-year-old pensioners from Mariinka. The couple were injured and their dwelling was ruined. So the police officers evacuated them to the treatment facility. And also the police officers are also inspecting the territories where the adversary was established. Since the beginning of the aggression, the units of the explosive devices has conducted 11,000 sorties. They've inspected several thousand of hectares of territory and found more than 103,000 of explosive devices. Since the 24th of February, we had the notifications about more than 4,000 missing children. 211 children are still missing. 190 of them are the children and they lost connection with them because of the occupation of the regions where they were living or during the evacuation. 9 of them, at least, were deported to the territory which is not under control of Ukraine. The national police is still going on with the measures to provide security and order, countering crime activity and to accomplish the missions of the military commandment. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. We invite all of the participants of the briefing to the stage for the Q&A session. Do you need the headphones for the simultaneous interpretation? So please.
Much. Luke Harding from the Guardian newspaper in London. A question about the counter-offensive by Ukrainian forces to take Kherson back from Russian occupation. Has this counter-offensive already started? And if it hasn't started, when will it start?
Yes, of course it will start. Well, maybe not today, but it will definitely begin. We will provide counteroffensive and will liberate our territories. Irina Sayevich, Suspilne TV. My question is about today's report of Transparency International. Mikhailo Podolyak also said that this is the informational operation to discredit the armed forces. How does the Ministry of Defense assess such reports? Thank you for this question so much. Ukraine is going on with the policy of openness and objective approach towards the legal assessment of the actions of the aggressor and the actions of our military who are conducting defense measures. I will remind you that the war in Ukraine is ongoing since 2014. And since then, Ukraine is gone to the criminal court on its own. and allowed the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court on its territory to investigate the military crimes and the crimes against humanity. In comparison with Russian Federation, which vice versa is closing and covering all of their crimes from the international community and does not comply with the verdicts of the international human courts and European human rights court. And I would like to remind you that the Ukrainian law enforcement system and our courts have investigated and had provided verdicts against the servicemen who had committed crimes in the military zone. We mean 2014, of course. There were some cases of that. When we have facts, if they are substantiated with the surnames, the consequences, the circumstances, we are open for the investigation to find out the context and the situation, how it happens. Because without the context, if we speak about some of the actions, we cannot assess the situation objectively. That is why, if those facts can be found in the international organizations, our law enforcement authorities are ready to find out the circumstances. My answer will be long, I'm warning you, because I cannot tell that in a nutshell. Second point. We need to pay attention to the fact that such research do not take into account some of the factors. For instance, that the Russians are using the tactics of the seize and taking of the settlements. So while we are waiting for the Russian adversary in the fields, how some of the people advise us, the Russians can just take all of our buildings. That is why the Ukrainian cities and villages are being strengthened and fortified against the crime state, which is Russian Federation, and the aggressor, the occupier. According to the principles of the highest efficiency, we locate the anti-air defense to cover the sky over the settlements. The defense forces, together with the military administrations and the local self-governance authorities, will regularly urge the local populations to evacuate from the adjacent areas to the combat areas. We provide equal rights for the volunteer transportation to the safe regions. But not all of the civilians agree for that. So to get the objective and correct outcome of the research, the methods and approaches are really significant to analyze the confirmed information. When the texts about the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine during the war, they lack the analysis of the actions of adversary, it looks like the research of the actions of the victim without taking into the consideration of the actions of the armed rapist. That is, it's impossible to get objective conclusions. We do understand that Russian Federation does not allow international organizations to come to the facts which can be used to the research of the circumstances, neither at the temporarily occupied territories and their own territory, nor through their own territories. So Ukraine is not just the victim of aggression, which has never been seen by the world before, but Ukraine is also the victim of its openness. So these reports are distorting the real picture of the international aggression crime which has been committed on the territory of Ukraine since 2014. The report lacks information about the conditions under which Ukraine has to act. Those are the defense conditions. So there is no chronology of events, that the crime has been committed by Russian Federation and Ukraine is protecting its land. Moreover, Ukraine is saving its own existence as a state. Russia altogether ignores any of the rules, any of the customs of war, any of the norms of different international conventions, and does not allow international organizations to study what it does. So under such circumstances, in this situation, there is the issue of objectivity raised. Objectivity of any investigation, if we speak about the investigation of the actions of the victim only. It's important to remember Bucha, it's important to remember Mariupol for the research to be objective. And looking at these examples, we need to show all of the violations and the international crimes which are committed by Russia. But the most frightening is in the conclusions which are looking at the actions of the victim only, that they violate the hierarchy, the importance and the weight of the crimes, the significance of the crimes. Because for the world, for the whole international community after World War II, the most scary crime is the crime of aggression, which violates the sovereign borders of the state and is the threat for the whole world. In this situation, the primary should be not the advice for the armed forces of Ukraine, which are protecting Europe now, but the primary from all of the international organizations should be the requirement for the whole world to stop the international crime of Russian Federation of aggression. Thousands of civilians have already perished because of that, and Russia will not stop on the territory of Ukraine. That is why, under these circumstances, concluding, I'd like to say that Ukraine is open for the investigation, and we are conducting them, but we consider that the key requirement and the attention of the whole world should be the actions of Russian Federation, which are the threat for the whole world. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
May I? I have a question to Deputy Minister of Defense. I'm Kanehira from Tokyo, Japan, working for Japanese TV, Tokyo Broadcasting System. You mentioned about so-called information war at occupied territory in your country. You said in East and South, Russians tried to setting up their media immediately to fulfill television and radio specs. In addition, about the cyberspace, Russia is creating the mobile spot. Could you give us the more detail about the information at the occupied territory in your country?
Thank you for the question. Weekly, we are providing information about the occupied territories, including now. This is the information which can be made public. This is the system of the actions of Russian Federation. They are forcing people. For instance, if we speak about passportization, they intimidate people, they blackmail them. Sometimes those are physical tortures. But simultaneously, of course, Russia is conducting the informational impact. The tools which we are using, well, of course, we cannot tell you about them because the war is ongoing. And if we tell about all of the tools, they will stop being tools. But still, the war will be ended with our victory. And we will share our tools later with the countries who are also under threat of Russian military and informational expansion. We can only speak about the outcomes. Lots of Ukrainians who are forced to stay at the temporarily occupied territories do not cooperate with the adversary, which means that Russian propaganda, Russian information does not influence them. Thank you. Any other questions? Clarification?
Just one additional question to Deputy Minister. Thank you for your basic policy to openness. About a year and a half passed since the invasion by Russian troops started, please give us the accurate number of the casualty of military and civilian. It's a very basic question, very basic question. And thank you for your openness. Thank you.
There is a rule of dissemination of information during the war. And the reason of this rule is because of the defensive idea and the needs. The information which is made public is connected with because the enemy cannot use the information. So during the war, we cannot make the information public about the whole number of the casualties. Still, we are saying that, of course, there are casualties from both sides. We say that we have less casualty, fewer casualties in comparison with the Russians. And we may say that those are thousands. Those are not hundreds, those are thousands. That's it. Thank you. The last question, please. Hello, on Helena Stroshko, Ukrinform. The Russian propaganda TV channels inform about the explosions at the 124th colony, which is located at the temporarily occupied territory where the Ukrainian POWs are located. Do you have any information about that? Thank you. As for the exchange of the prisoners of war, the main intelligence department is speaking about that, so they can answer about that only. And this topic is totally closed for public discussion because of the danger of any discussion. When I speak about the danger, this could be the danger or threat posed for the exchange process, because it's very complicated. Thank you. Thank you so much for the briefing. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. So please follow the news of the Media Center of Ukraine. Thank you.